What's up, everyone? So I'm here with Nii Codjoe, and he is an ENTJ. By the way, what is your Enneagram type? Do you know it?
3.
An Enneagram 3. Okay. Do you know the instinctual variants and everything too?
Social first.
Okay. Social. Okay.
Social, and then I would say 1-to-1, and then self-prize. I think
Oh,
that's what the 2
man.
and 3 would be.
That's what's up, man. Okay. I was thinking that, but then I was also like, I could probably see 5, but then I could also probably see 8. Yeah, I don't know. I was just wondering. But cool. So yeah, I'm here with Nii Codjoe, ENTJ Social 3. And honestly, I'm really excited for this video. I was just telling Nii, Nii is also a good friend of mine. We go pretty way back, actually. We both were in profiler training, and Nii actually worked with Antonia and Joel for a little bit at Personality Hacker. We roomed together at the last live event, and we had a dope conversation about NI and the auxiliary position and how it looks like for us and everything. And as I've been pumping out these interview videos, Nii is actually one of the first people that came to mind. And I was like, yo, actually, I want to talk about, more of like how this is, because as y'all know from my channel, I feel like a lot of times, because there are so many ENJ who have not really done the work in their auxiliary position, then it's easy to kind of like dismiss them. And now we have like a whole bunch of like mistypes of people mistyping like ESFPs and ESFJs as ENFJs a lot of times, because it's like, oh, well, like we see the SE and we see this, and it's like, to me, I don't really want to pin these types as ENFJ until we see the auxiliary NI, but a lot of people, like, they're not really like looking for that. And I think that a lot of times this happens as well with ENTJs, even to the point where sometimes they might not even be seeing NI for the ENTJ, but they see the more reserved nature, because ENTJs can come off like very introverted, believe it or not. And then they're like, oh yeah, then that's an INTJ. And it's like, so there's just a whole bunch of things that like I felt like we wanted to clear up. But the biggest thing that we wanted to clear up in this video was, number one, how NI looks like in the auxiliary position when it's operating at a high level. And then also how it could maybe like be similar and different between an ENFJ and an ENTJ. And so this is just going to be a free flow discussion. We might even address some of the things that we talked about back at the hotel during that live event, because I told Nii, I was like, he brings out a different side of me. We were pretty excited, and we talked for like hours up in the room about a lot of different things. And so this is like really cool to like just come back and not only rehash that conversation, but then even like add more into it. But the first thing that I want to throw to Nii, just to kind of like break the ice, is that I remember in that conversation, the first thing that you had brought up to me was that you had been hanging out with your ENFJ mother-in-law. And you, as an ENTJ, you always like use NI in a certain type of fashion. But then you started observing how your mother-in-law was using NI, and you were like, oh, wait a minute, like this is a little bit different, but like I see what you're doing, because it's the same function, but it's now being paired with like FE instead of TE. Could you tell me a little bit more about that experience?
Yeah. She's an ENFJ, and she just has a really deep instincts about people, about what drives them, what's probably going on in their minds. And she has a great way of connecting with everyone, and just knowing how to connect and communicate with each individual person she meets in a way that makes them feel comfortable, in a way that makes them feel safe and connected. And so I thought that was really neat how the FE, extroverted feeling, and NI, or perspectives, introverted intuition, were coming together or harmonizing to serve people and connect with them. And so I thought that was neat, just to see the flavor that ENFJs bring with their NI and FE.
True. Yeah. How would you say, actually, I think maybe we could even start off with this. How would you describe your relationship with introverted intuition, or NI slash perspectives, as Personality Hacker puts it?
How would I describe it? I would, that's a great question.
And if you want to make it
Uh-huh.
a little bit more filleted out, because I know that it's often said that our auxiliary function, our secondary function, is the one that we show a lot of resistance toward. Would you say that you also showed a lot of resistance toward your NI when you first learned about type and you first started like getting into it, or why or why not? And how, yeah, and then like how have you like grown into that? Because I have some thoughts about that too, but I'm really interested to know about yours.
I wouldn't say that I had a resistance to NI. I was intrigued by it. And when I started to learn more about it, I started to see the places, the glimpse and glimmers of it in my past. And that I didn't, it wasn't something I developed when I was younger because I wasn't aware of it. I would probably describe my NI in a couple different ways. One of them is, I would say it's a map for me. It's like it allows me to see I would say in some ways I feel like my TE would be, I'm in the game. I'm in, if this were like a video game, right? Like there's a part of me with SE and TE that's like in the video game, and I'm like running around. And then I would say my NI would be almost like an advisor that's outside of the game or outside of the environment. And it's basically saying, okay, Nii, inside the game, you probably want to make a left coming up because there's a ton of traffic coming. And if you make a left at the next slide, you're probably going to shave off about 5 or 10 minutes. And so he's able to give Nii, that's inside of the game, advice and direction and help him see things that he would struggle to see because he's in the game and he's taking action and running around. So that would probably be how I describe it. And so the more, the better NI is, Nii in the seat, overseeing the map, looking, like pulling up data, looking for trends, the better he gets at that, the easier NI TE or NISE in the game, the easier his life is. Because then I don't have to waste and expend as much energy running around, going in the wrong direction, going into the wrong building. I can preserve a lot more energy and resource because Nii is giving me the download.
Yeah, yo, that's spot on, and that makes so much sense. I think I'll start off by also saying that, like, yeah, for me, I didn't, and I said this in the podcast that I had with Antonia and Joel on being an ENFJ man, but I never really had a resistance to my NI either. In fact, you put it perfectly. I was intrigued by it. Even before I knew about type, I saw my inclination to dive into and move into NI. I think that my only resistance was probably coming from the external world, which was that for me, at least, whenever I would try to present NI, then the people around me, they would kind of like push it back. Like they didn't reward it. Like I was the guy who, when I would like hang out with friends and stuff like that, sure, my SE would come out and, I was goofing off and I was, doing all this other stuff. But I was also the guy who would often try to be like, I remember like my freshman year, I tried to like organize like a weekly Bible study, like with the friends, and for me, like as a Christian, especially, like I enjoyed Bible study because it's a time like, sit down and, really allow myself to like think like, okay, what is God trying to tell me? Like, through my intuition and stuff like that, like process this verse and stuff like that. Or like what type of perspectives are other people having about this verse? Like, and what does it really mean about, what our faith is and in the rest of the world and stuff like that. And so I was really like drawn to that kind of thing. I was always drawn to like symbolism and like, things of that nature. But it was, and also I definitely was always the type to like have like really long, I'm still that way, but now Telegram has helped a lot. But I always was the type to like have like really long paragraph messages. I just was never interested in small talk. Everything that I would say and talk with people had substance, depth, meaning. And if somebody tried to bring small talk to me, then I would often try to deepen it. So like that was something that like I became like very skilled at, where especially now as a server, like I try to do that. Like, I'm not going to just sit there and let us talk about something that is, in my opinion, not really like substantial, I'm going to find an avenue to deepen that conversation, and bring a whole bunch of like symbolism and stuff like that into it, and learn more about you, or learn more about the world through it. And at that point, either you are going to be like, oh, this is too deep for me, and you're going to take your small talk somewhere else, or you're going to come with me and we're going to have a more in-depth conversation, and you may hopefully enjoy it. So that was always the type of person that I was. And I think that just even to go back on that, like introverted intuition, as Antonia and Joel put it, they call it perspectives, because for those who don't know by any chance, the way that they describe it is like, if you've ever had a thought, like thought A, thought B, thought C, and you just kind of like go all the way up to like maybe like thought L, then you're like, wait a minute, how the heck did I get here? NI users, so that's NENJ type, ENFJ, ENTJ, INTJ, INFJ, their minds subconsciously reroute and like retrace their thought process. So then before you know it, just like, oh, how'd I get to thought L? Then it's like, oh, L, and I'm not about to try to say the alphabet backwards, but they see the correlation between A and L. And now by doing that so often, they see the patterns between these thoughts, and they keep on building more and more of a constellation with that. And then before you know it, you see somebody else and they're thinking thought E, and then all of a sudden your intuition, because it's been going back and forth through all of these roadmaps like so frequently, you're like, L? And then they're like, whoa, how the heck did you know that? And it's like, I don't know. But yeah, that's actually what's going on. And so with NI, like once you're able to do that so frequently, that's metacognition. And that's allowing you to then be able to hop into other people's perspectives, see longer down the timeline, things along those lines. And what Nii was saying about preserving energy, especially in my opinion, as an ENJ, that is so true and it's so helpful, which is another reason why I personally was very drawn to NI, because before I started like really developing NI, like especially as an extrovert and, you know, FE Dom, I was using a lot of energy and I was giving it to like a lot of people that didn't deserve it. But then when I really started, or not even just people, but like activities, you know, like I naturally produce more energy than an introvert would, but that doesn't mean that I can't burn myself out. So when I had NI starting to like develop, then I started to have like a more strategic way of placing my energy. Now, a lot of times I talk about seeds on my channel and like how I see myself as a limited source of water. And so therefore I have to pay attention to like the seeds that I'm going to be watering. What do I want to cultivate in my garden? Whether that be relationships, whether that be thoughts, whether that be like anything, all of that water is energy. And so I have to be able to see like, okay, how much do I have? Is that the type of seed that I want to continue to allow to grow? When is that seed going to produce fruit that'll be able to help nourish me again so that we can keep this cycle going? And it's this whole thing that now I've been thinking about so that now I can always have more energy for myself, and properly distribute it. And so Nii, when you were talking about, you know, that whole video game thing, totally, like I'm with that. Like as I'm going about life and I'm like in the video game, I'm even like navigating conversation, whatever it might be, then it's like NI is like in the background. It's like, okay, you might want to drop this right here, or you might not want to water that seed, or you might want to do this, you might want to do that. And I listen to that intuition. And then of course, there's also times where NI might not even really know something. And that's where I think that we might have an advantage with SE's tertiary. You can just act on a dime. We're not nearly as good as the SP types, but I think that it comes in pretty handy with being able to improvise when we need to. And also, like you said in Joyce's video recently with the ENTJs, I really related to this. There's a beauty in being able to put something out in the world, and not being afraid of that. Like a lot of INJs with the SE inferior, they're afraid a lot of times to put something out in the world, but that's the only way that you're going to really be able to get outer world feedback. So the sooner that you're able to really put that out there and be able to like get that feedback and then be able to not like fix it again, then the better you'll be able to get back out there and then have the right thing out. So I just spewed a lot, but yeah.
No, that was great. I love what you said about a couple things. One is, to your point, like getting out there and like having experiences that NI can then observe and start to see a pattern is so valuable for us. It makes it a lot easier to be able to catch patterns and to be able to like comfortably navigate a situation
Mhm.
in a way that's graceful and so yeah, spot on. I couldn't agree more. And it sounds like that's been beneficial for you, just being able to by having that NI be more cultivated and developed. It's easier for you to know how to help people. Probably, I'm sure you probably give a lot of advice to your to friends, or people come to you to get your perspective on things, or knowing what relationships to invest in, because we only have so much energy.
Yeah.
Energy is yeah, we have only so much energy. We only have so much willpower, and decision fatigue starts to kick in after a while. If we're making too many decisions, we start to get fatigued. There was this interesting research study that was done around decision fatigue, and what they discovered is that they looked at judges in courts, and they discovered that if you want to get the most favorable sentence from a judge, you should meet that judge as early as possible in the morning.
Mhm.
But that the further in the day, especially after lunch, the after the judge has made tons and tons and tons of decisions, they start to get fatigued. They lose energy, especially after having a nice big meal, right? And so now, the difference between 5 and 10 years is just like, well, I'm kind of grouchy and tired, and and I've been making a bunch of decisions and thinking a lot. So, their decisions end up being less favorable the further along they go in the day. And so, to your point, that ability to conserve energy becomes really useful. I think it allows us to make better decisions.
Yo, yeah, that's really insightful for sure. And I can definitely see like how that would be. Even stuff like picking out your clothes every day. I had heard research about how like the most rich people, a lot of times they kind of wear like the same things over and over again, or similar to the same things over and over again. Or they try to keep it simple because we can only make but so many decisions a day. And when you're like that big in the game, then it's like you don't want to waste one of those decisions, or like that decision making power on something like, oh, what am I going to wear today? So you just kind of like subside that, and that really like helps a lot. So yeah, it really just goes back into like how, again, like Ed and I really does help um, with being able to manage your energy appropriately. I want to also ask you, so I have this theory that especially as EJ types, since we enjoy to like manage people, or and maybe even in your case, resource and stuff like that. When you got into personal development, like I know that something that I've been doing is I view all the functions in my car as like almost like the inside out characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
Pretty much like I'm actively like envisioning FE, NI, SE, and TI in my head, interacting with each other. And I don't want FE and TI to have a kind of like Buzz Lightyear and Woody relationship. Like I want them all to like be able to get along, because the better they'll be able to get along, and the better they'll be able to operate, and the better I'll be able to operate as a person. And I know that a lot of times when I present this kind of like mindset to people, then it's like, what? But I was wondering, like, how much do you relate to that? Like, managing and like envisioning almost like your cognitive functions as like personifying them and having them be seen as like a team of some sort.
You can totally relate to that. Like I'll have like internal dialogues where like TE is just ready to jump into act. I almost have like each one has their own personality, and even probably even like physical characteristics. But I can imagine TE is just like situations where TE is ready to take action and do something, and I, right, which is a little bit more calm and peace and centered and a little bit more zen, is telling TE like, hey, let's slow down here and just get a little bit more perspective, right? But like TE and SE are like ready to jump into action. FI might be feeling one way or another. So I can, like, in my mind, can imagine the four of them having a conversation. And I think what's one of the reasons why that's I think a powerful model is because, in a way, it's teaching ourselves to collaborate with ourselves. Collaboration is a very powerful tool. This whole idea we probably heard before of like 1 + 1 = 11, or 1 + 1 equals, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 11. There's a leverage that comes, this higher order value that comes from collaboration. And I think normally we think about collaboration with in the context of like interacting with other people. But even thinking about collaboration with the functions can be a really useful exercise, so that we're in harmony with ourselves and we don't have different parts of ourselves fighting with each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. So then, as an ENTJ, how would you then see the functions in your head? Like, you kind of did speak on it a little bit, but how has that like grown? Like, now, how's the relationship between TE and NI, and then how's the relationship between even like TE and FI? You know, and how have you been continuing to like cultivate that?
Yeah, I would say that one of the ways has been that I would say before I probably led with TE. I was just like have an instinct to jump into action, and now I prefer to have TE hide kind of in the back and lead with NI. And if, for example, if I'm in a meeting, for example, I will be far less likely to be the first person to speak. I think my instinct before with TESE is wanting to jump in there and say something. But I would say that it's starting with NI, letting NI lead the four rather than TE leading the four. And so sometimes TE will be far in the back and may not be very obvious. And so it's NI starting first. And then I would say probably like, it really depends on the situation. But one of the things that's been very helpful is, as a job and profession, I'm a researcher. And so my job is to get inside people's heads and understand what is their relationship to the product that's in front of them, or what is their relationship to the problems that they're facing. And so it's been really great practice and muscle memory to just get comfortable with letting NI lead. And letting TE sit back for a while, sometimes to the part where I get uncomfortable, a little like, ugh. But I find that it's really productive to have NI lead first. And then also another practical thing is getting advice from people. If there's a certain goal or objective I have or something I'm interested in, I try to find the smartest people that I know in my network that I can talk to, and I'll just have conversations with them. And one of the things I find from those conversations is like, I believe that the fastest way to get to any destination is by hanging around people that are already there. And I find that like that experiential knowledge of having a conversation or a relationship with them translates this, there's this like knowledge transfer that happens unconsciously that allows me or anybody to get to that destination much faster than reading 10 books on the subject. And so I find that by hanging out with them, and having conversations with them, my FI is almost able to kind of embody some elements of who they are. And it feels, the knowledge becomes more experiential, and it's not just like this like very abstract concept. I love the abstract concept, but then being able to like in some ways feel it or internalize it helps to create this like instinct, a deeper instinct. And then I think about the model of be, do, have, that the best way to have any kind of outcome is to do the right things. But the best way to do the right things is to become the kind of person that would naturally do those things. And so if I just hang around where the average of the 5 people we hang around. And so when I think about something who I want to become or like where I want to go, I start with who. Whereas TE is normally like how. And so I'm like, TE, we're going to just set you back for a while, and let's use NI and FI to become the kind of person that it would just naturally create that outcome in a way that's very organic and natural. Wow. And the how, there's so many ways to get to a destination. And so the how is actually the least important. I feel like the most important part is becoming that person. Wow. And then by becoming that person, we'll naturally do those things. And then TE can just like, I feel like the outcomes become very, very different that way. And it feels just more, the process feels more organic, less forced. And so like that's been a framework that's been really helpful, is leading with NI and FI and having more experiential knowledge, becoming that person, and then naturally the TE follows.
Wow. Yo, that was rich. That was really, really, really good. Yeah, this is, for those of y'all watching, like, you know, I hope that y'all are writing this down. I definitely know that I'm going to be as I'm editing this, because this is some really good advice from an ENTJ. So you don't get that like just every day, but that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to find out how I relate as an ENFJ, or where I might like differ, because I definitely agree that with the whole notion of like, you know, like hanging out, you know, with where you like want to be, like even like, you know, that's how I ended up like being able to land, you know, where I am with Antonia and Joel. You know, like I just remember like even like back years ago when I was just listening to their podcast and I was just like so excited about it. And then somehow, you know, I was able to get like I think it was about like 20 seconds of audio of them just saying happy birthday to me really briefly on my Facebook page. And I was like geeked. And then fast forward, I now have spent like 4 days over at their place, and we're like on a first name basis, and I can like text them whenever. And I was on a podcast, and it's just like, whoa, it boggles my mind. But I think that one of the biggest things is, for me, especially with NI, is it's been envisioning. And I think that this is why NI is most associated with manifestation, because I think that for us, when we spend a lot of time just kind of like obsessing over a concept, over an idea, over a reality that we want in the future, then especially as NJs, I believe that all of a sudden everything in our life, like we start like pushing out some sort of like vibrations that will allow us to then just move toward that goal that we have our minds fixated on. And we continue to keep our minds like really just fixated on that, like this is what we want, this is what we want, this is what we want. And that manifestation is like coming up. The SE is following that NI, like as if like it's some sort of like tail of some sort, and it's just like drifting you closer and closer to there. So then also with like the energy management, now it's like, okay, when I put energy over here, is it going to help me get over there still? No, then I'm not going to put energy over here. Oh, what about if I water this seed? Will that produce fruit that'll help me get there? Probably not. So therefore, I don't want to do that. Sometimes you can afford to like, you know, go and have a little sightseeing on the sides and everything like that. But once you have this like fixated goal of where you want to go, then I feel like for me, like that's just how it's been. Like you just keep on progressing there more and more, like slowly. And so then it's almost like a lot of times, and for you as a TE user, I feel like it might even be different. But for I think for NFJs, we don't really often have like this 10-year plan kind of thing. I think that a lot of times, and you know, other NFJs can correct me if I'm wrong, I definitely plan, but it's more like I have a vision of where I want to go and how I want to, and not necessarily even like how I want to get there, but I just have a very good vision. And the more that I continue to crystallize that vision and make it more real in my head, then I kind of like have I have enough of a plan, but it's not really like a 10-year kind of plan thing. It's more of like okay, I'm drifting and I'm literally following my intuition, and I'm seeing myself grow closer and closer to that vision that I have. And it's very abstract in nature, but I feel like that's like how it usually like kind of like is. I'm assuming that as an ENTJ, like especially with TE, like having a step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of mindset, like you might be a little bit more practical with that, but like by how much?
Yeah, so I can definitely relate to the experience of like, I think NI is very powerful in that once our mind anchors onto something,
Mm.
a future, a picture or impression of the future, it's almost like we float there. It's
Yeah.
almost like we just kind of drift there. There's not almost like there's less of this like conscious effort of like, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. It feels like the 80-20 is getting clear on what outcome or destination we want. And then circumstances and situations emerge organically that just guide us to that destination. And then in the moment, we can pattern recognize and find ways of, like leaning into the current and get there faster, more gracefully.
Right.
I would say, like, in terms of the planning, at least for me, it's less of like, it's got I've got to do this, and then step 2, and then step 3, step 4. It's more like, sometimes I think of it more as ingredients.
Ooh.
Like, if this is the product, right? If this is what we want the dish to look like, we probably need a little more salt here.
Okay.
We probably need a little more garlic here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Definitely relate to that. That makes a lot of sense. So then how frequently would you say that you seem to have like a step-by-step kind of process?
I would say,
Like if a percentage of the time, like how frequently, like would you say then, if you had to throw a percentage on it?
percentage. Probably like 60%. 60%.
Okay.
Like, it would be more so like the planning is around like how to get that ingredient. So I might be like, I need some butter here, or some from salt, but I don't have any here. Where can I get some salt? What kind of salt should I get? So that's where the TE or planning might start to play in. And so I'm like, let me go find who's the best expert I know on salt. Let me just have a conversation with them about salt, hang out with them, and then let me get some salt, and then I'll add it to the dish.
Got you. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. I feel like that's definitely different from how, for example, like an SJ would work. Which again, like makes sense. I think that when it comes to like step-by-step processes, the STJs are the ones who are like the best with that, because they're going by SI, which is like, okay, this is how things have been done in the past and it's always worked. SI is very reliable. And then on top of that, they have the TE to also like add on with the SI to be like, okay, this is how we should do it and all of that. But yeah, as an NJ, especially like as NTJ, like I always did wonder, like, okay, so how does that kind of work for you guys? Where it's like, okay, you're following an intuition that's like very abstract, and not nearly as reliable as SI, at least not from the external, not from like other people's perspective. But then at the same time, you still have the TE, like, okay, there is a kind of like order that you want to follow. So that ingredient thing, that's really spot on. And I can definitely relate to that as well, because I feel like that's, again, like that's kind of like how it is like with me talking about like, okay, what type of garden do I want? And in order to be able to have this type of garden, then I have to have a certain amount of water. And if I'm spending too much time watering seeds, apple tree seeds, when I don't want an apple tree garden, like or an apple tree in my garden, why am I doing that? I have to allow that to be further down on my priority list. And I feel like that's where like NI has really been coming to like help me a lot too. But that's really interesting. So I'm still trying to dig down more into some of the differences between then an ENTJ and an ENFJ. What would you say are some that you've already like noticed, like whether in our conversations in the past or like from observing like your mother-in-law, or just like even things that you've like heard in general, etc.?
It feels like ENJs have like an instinct for management, or like, I would say like leadership, or maybe like stewardship, kind of stewarding a situation. And I feel like the way in which ENTJs and ENFJs approach that are different. The destination might be the same, but it seems like ENFJs are more dialed into the the mood or the energy of the group, and like using that as a catalyst to get people to align on a certain direction. Whereas I think ENTJs probably are more I think they take more of a direct path, and they're probably a bit more like naturally task oriented in their orientation. Whereas I can feel like the ENFJ is a little bit more indirect in arriving there. So I would say like that's off the top of my head, that's like one difference or distinction that I've noticed.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious to hear your point of view.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that too. That's actually one of the ways that I distinguished ENTJs and ENFJs in the past. Like I was, for example, I had compared from Game of Thrones. I believe that Tyrion was an ENTJ, and I believe that Marjorie was an ENFJ. And I feel like usually when ENFJs are involved, I think this is why a lot of times like people might have it's a paradox where they have a harder time trusting the ENFJ, or they have an easier time trusting the ENFJ. Because those who have an easier time trusting the ENFJs, because like the ENFJ can kind of like create a very like instant rapport with the person, to almost, it's where it's like the rapport is so good that they kind of like lose whatever quote unquote common sense, and it's just like, yeah, I just trust this person kind of thing, which a lot of times is like if the ENFJ has like a, you know, pure heart, pure intention, stuff like that, has really worked on themselves and thought through things, then I would say like, okay, it's good to like trust that anyway. But you know, of course, like when the ENFJs are like you know, manipulative in nature, stuff like that, then that's when a lot of problems can like happen. So then just like how it's like a lot easier to trust them, because it's a lot easier to trust them, it can be a lot harder to trust them, because it's like, oh no, I've heard about the people like you. I'm seeing my natural inclination to trust you so much, and that's making me not want to trust you. And sometimes they could be right about that. Sometimes they could be wrong about that. But I feel like that happens rarely with the ENTJ, because the ENTJs are just like much more direct. And so therefore there's not as much with the people being like, should I trust you? Should I not? Because the ENTJs, in my opinion, it's not that they can't charm, but I think that's like they don't really try to use that route. So some of the ENTJs that like instantly like come to mind, I'm thinking of like Denzel Washington and almost like everything that he's played in. Like I think that he's an ENTJ. And when you watch him, like for example, I can remember the Titans, or when you see him in the movie Deja Vu, or Out of Time, you know, all of these different movies, like you can see how he like approaches life and everything, and he has this like presence and all of that, and he is very direct. He still has like, I think that ENJs in general, they have a manipulative nature to them, but manipulative in the fashion that you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I think it's because honestly it's just hard to explain to you what's going on in our head. Like it's an intuitive thing that we're following, and so all we know is like, okay, this is how we should move these chess pieces, and we just want everybody to kind of follow their script, and I'm even following my script on top of that. And so it's almost like I envision the whole stage, the whole play, and I know how this is going to go. And I have to play my part as well, which means sometimes I might have to play dumb. Sometimes I might have to, you know, do this. Sometimes I might have to be the one to ask this question and let the ball roll in this way. Or I might have to do this, I might have to do that. And all of this will progress the agenda that I have. But the agenda, and like, you know, again, it depends on the individual, is for the greater good. But a lot of times, if I present, like, you know, if I try to like say like, hey, this is my plan, then either one, people will be like, well, how do you know that that's going to work? And literally the only way that you can show them that it's going to work when you're an ENJ is by just showing them that it's going to work, which means that you have to kind of like allow them to like be the puppets and like follow through with that, which I understand how a lot of people are defensive about that because they don't like any idea of like feeling like they've been controlled even for the greater good. But also the second thing is just a lot of times like, you can't explain a lot of times. So like I often talk about my personal favorite ENTJ fictional character. His name is Paul Briggs from Graceland, and he was a finesser for sure. He pretty much the whole show is about these FBI agents who live together in a house. And this ISTJ character, he joins them in the house. He's also new to the FBI and everything. He just graduated, and he graduated top of his class, and he's a huge fan of the ENTJ character, Paul Briggs. But the ISTJ is really by the book, as ISTJs usually are and everything. And then he sees that Paul Briggs is like very not by the book. And that's kind of like this, oh, don't meet your heroes kind of thing. Cause he's like, yo, I thought that Paul Briggs is going to be so amazing in this sense. But then he starts to see how like Paul does a lot of things very unconventionally, but he gets results, which as an ISTJ, his TE is like, oh, results. He didn't do it the way that I wanted him to do it, but he still did it. But a lot of times the conflict in the show is that nobody ever really knows when Paul is using them as like pawns in some type of way. And even though he always gets the results that they all would have wanted, they're like, man, but why, why did you have to use us? Or like, they just don't like that idea of like feeling like they're being controlled by him in some fashion. But the thing is, when you watch the show, especially like from the outside, you're like, dang, but if Paul took the time to try to describe his whole plan, you probably would not have understood. You probably would have had all of these doubts. A lot of times for the plan to work, you cannot know about the plan. That's just, and it sucks that that's just how it is, but yeah. And so I feel like a lot of times like with ENFJs, it's the same way, but even more that way. And that's where we can be a little bit less direct than the ENTJ would be. And then that's why like a lot of times like people might have like a side eye, like, okay, like, what are you doing? Which a lot of times like we're not really even doing anything. But until we can gain your trust, then we paradoxically have to do things to prove to you that we've gained your trust. And this is another thing that I think that we talked about more, but I'm gonna pause for right there and I'm gonna see if you have anything to add on to that.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective and commentary, because what came to mind was, I think part of it is our culture has this resistance to strategy or to being strategic, or we often think that we often conflate intentionality with like manipulation, or like being intentional is really smart and good. Like it's good to have an intention, and it's good to have something that we're moving towards. And I think our culture has this overfixation on everything has to feel 100% authentic. And they think if something is authentic, it means there was no planning. It just naturally happened. But most things in the world don't just naturally happen. Like if we think about a city, right? Like do we just wake up one day and New York City just appeared? And and that and there are millions of people living there, and there's a system and there's transit. No, that was intentionality of over time, millions of human beings collaborating, having an intention and saying, let's pull our resources and heads together to create something or build something. So I think our culture has this overfixation with like, I just wake up one day and everything just kind of magically grows, but no garden just like one day magically appears. There's intentionality in shaping the whether it's like the soil, or thinking about what type of plants or trees or vegetables to grow. And once those conditions are set, then organically each tree and each plant starts to grow very naturally. There is creation and shaping. And it's unfortunate that sometimes that can get misconstrued or misinterpreted. So like for me, I don't really think about it in terms of like thinking of people as pawns, or like, want to get you to do this, get you to do that. It's just looking at the situation and seeing like, oh, there's like an opportunity here. This person's really strong at that. This person really has a gift for that. How can we collaborate? How can we synchronize to where we are working much better together? And I think that ends up producing really great outcomes and experiences for people.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think in those situations it's difficult to communicate that kind of plan of like, oh, this is why I'm trying to do this, or like letting them in on the plan that you have to try to
Um,
spot? Do you find difficulty in that?
I Yes, I would say yes. It can be a challenge, and I also feel like it's a lot easier for people to buy into something if they understand it, and if they doesn't mean necessarily that there must be a complete comprehensive explanation, but I think people tend to be more on board if they get an idea of what's going on. And that's one of the areas I'm still growing in, is knowing how to take these abstract impressions and translate it into a way that's very concrete and sensory and like down to earth to somebody who might just be like, I don't understand why we're doing it that way. But in some ways, my work as a researcher has been very helpful for that, because a lot of what my team and I do is we run experiments.
Mhm.
We will conduct research studies, and we might have a hunch or hypothesis that's a little intangible and just like a little abstract. But then we've got to be able to take that impression and translate it into a hypothesis statement that anybody can look at and be like, okay, I understand kind of the impression here. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if I agree with it. And it's like, that's great. It's a hypothesis, right? Now let's go test it in the real world, and then turn around and come back and provide really clear data and tell a really clear story to something that was very abstract and very ephemeral before. And so it's still something that I'll keep working on, but it's feel like it's a useful tool or element.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely get that. Um, okay, so kind of switching gears. What would you say, or what type of ENTJs would you say that you've most related to, whether it be in like, fictional characters or like ones in real life, and why?
Well, it's actually funny you say that, because I don't feel like I relate to a lot of ENTJs. And there might be like some FI in there that's, I'm special, I'm a special snowflake, and there's no one like me. But I would say part of the reasons are, some of the reason is because um, I would say, like, for me personally, this is my, everybody has their own like value system, but for me, the most important thing in life are people and relationships.
Hmm.
And I feel like part of my purpose and goal is to use TE and NI to serve people. So I feel like a lot of ENTJs that I meet,
Mhm.
they don't care about relationships. They just care about what they can get from the relationship. Um,
Mhm.
they're very focused on outcomes, and I think the process is often more important than the outcome. Um, and so I think like my faith in God also like shapes my worldview and how I go about executing things in the world. But I would say like most ENTJs that I meet can be kind of abrasive, and I can feel like they're looking at me and they're like, okay, and this isn't all of them, by the way. This is definitely not all of them, and I don't want to characterize all ENTJs as being this way, but I can sometimes feel this like sense of urgency. Like, we gotta go, we gotta go. Like, what can you do for me? How can you be of value to me? My goal is, and intention is good, and it's going to be a win-win for everybody. But so I can find, I don't know, that can feel like a turnoff to me.
No,
Uh, and I think something that's been very helpful is um, when I was younger, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I worked with a therapist to be able to unpack some of the scripting from my childhood. We all we all in some ways are conditioned to see the world a certain way, and that conditioning comes from the way that we were raised and the experiences, the formative experiences we had. And often we end up playing out that script that we were given unconsciously, even if we try to avoid it. So I found therapy to be incredibly helpful to be able to observe the script and be able, and not claiming that I see everything and that I see everything that went on, but I was able to see like patterns. And I would say like one of the biggest lessons I took from working with a therapist, she was an INFJ, really amazing. So that having an NI Dom be able to help me like sort through things was incredible. But one of the biggest things I realized is that unconsciously I saw myself as a human doing instead of a human being. And I had this script that I'm only valuable to people if I produce and create value. So I got to run around and just create a bunch of stuff. I got to do a bunch of stuff. Even in my relationship with God, I've got to do all these things so that God is pleased with me. And after coming through the experience, I realized like, wow, that's a lie, and that's an unhealthy script. And that I'm not just me, every human being is a child of God, and we are all inherently valuable just for who we are. And there's no need for me to do things to get loved. And there's no need for other people to feel the pressure or sense to do that. And so that allowed me to just be a lot more comfortable with being. And it's still something I'm learning and growing in. But I realized like, I don't have to do to prove a point. I don't have to do out of a fear of not succeeding or not being good enough or not measuring up. I can let all of those unhealthy scripts just fall by the wayside. And so that was something that I find that was really powerful and life-changing for me. And I feel like a lot of ENTJs like are still kind of driven by I gotta do. And the doing isn't inherently bad, but the question is, well, why, or what's the reason you're so compelled to do? What's the reason? What's driving it? And I suspect for a lot of people that have that do instinct, behind all of that is deep insecurities and deeply rooted fears of not feeling like they matter unless they do or produce. And that if we're all on an island, it's like if I don't go find some fish, or if I don't like start a fire, I'm going to get voted off the island.
Wow. Yeah, again, that was really rich. I feel that though. That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like I've definitely seen that as well. Because like I know, especially when I first got into type, I was actually pretty surprised when I met you. And I met like, another ENTJ named Johannes. And I met like just a couple more. And I'm like, oh wow, like they're really like, calm, and they aren't like, what I've been like reading about, like bulldozers and things along those lines, like always trying to just produce, but they do also seem like they're capable of doing that. Like I would assume that earlier you were talking about how you let NI lead, but I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are still comfortable like in situations where you have to make a quick decision, like TESE kind of like decision. Would you say so?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, like that's, in my opinion, like that's where it is. Like it's about having that spectrum, that flexibility of knowing when to like be able to relax and all of that, but also not losing your ability to be able to hop up over here on this end when, you need to do things like really quickly, you need to make a decision. And one of the quotes that I really like, that's helped me a lot, is that successful people don't always make the right decisions. They make their decisions right. And I feel like that's like a very like EJ kind of thing. Like, like you sometimes you just have to, like, when you don't have the time to sit there and NI through everything, so you have to just kind of like throw something. And then once you throw it, then that's when your NI and SE come in and they're like, okay, let's see all the ways that we can navigate this so that we can shift the perspective of it and be able to like use it in a better manner, because, and we have to like just follow through. And a lot of times, because even though we just threw something, I feel like a lot of times it wasn't a bad decision, because our intuition still had some say in there, but just maybe not as much as we would have liked. So there's a little bit more wrinkles that we have to iron out and like polish, but it's not really necessarily like an impulsive or, you know, trash move. And so, but yeah, everything that you're saying, like, that really makes a lot of sense. Especially like, you know, bringing in like, you know, the relationship like with God and all of that. Like, just again, like as you're speaking off the top of my head, like I recalled, like, also I believe that Paul, the apostle, was an ENTJ, and that was one of the things that he spoke about a lot. Like, he always talked about, like, you know, we should not boast in what we're doing for God and all of that, because honestly, everything that we're doing for God does not matter. Like, because we can never do, quote unquote, enough for him. That's why Jesus came, and he's the one who did everything for us. So whatever we're doing for him is merely a fruit of the gratitude that we have for what Jesus did already, which is, you know, again, like according to like Christian theology and all of that. But that to me was like really interesting that, you know, you said that that was something that you struggled with. And then that's what I see, at least in like, you know, the Bible, like Paul, out of like all of the writers, like talking the most about. I think for me, as an ENFJ, it's kind of similar, where it's like, I feel like especially like growing up, I everybody always talks about, oh, you know, like, you're not supposed to fit in, you're supposed to stand out. I really feel like I never, and maybe this is the 9 in me, I'm an Enneagram 9, but in my opinion, like, I never really did try to actually stand out. Like, I was always trying to just fit in. Like, and I'm a social 9 at that. So like, we try to do that like better, like, you know, than anyone kind of thing. Like, I just want to like really just blend in with the crowd, but not just blend in and then like go like completely invisible, but I want to be able to have like my role, you know? So sometimes even when people like make like the jokes about like the ENFJ cult leader, like I'll play along with the joke sometimes, but then to be honest, it's like, if I was a cult leader, I'd be like a very untraditional or a very unconventional type of cult leader, because it wouldn't be me necessarily as the leader. It'd be kind of like, hey, we're all pretty much like equally important. I just play the role that I have in this group. I want you to play your role. I want you to play your role, but don't worship me. You know, like we all worship each other kind of thing, you know? So that's kind of like the mindset I've always had. Like, I just kind of all want us to still have our individuality in what we bring to the table, but now I want us to use what we bring to the table cohesively so that we can have something beautiful, which is what we have in the fabric of society. And that's why I guess I try to help everybody, you know, as a personal development coach, to become the best versions of themselves, because the better version of yourself that you are, then you being a part of society, you will naturally also help society become better. And that feeds back into us. But I think that in trying to fit in so much, I never successfully was able to do that. And later learning that, you know, like, I'm an ENFJ and we make up like 1.7% of the population, especially as ENFJ males, and stuff, then it's just like, whoa, you know, that creates a lot, you know, even just being an intuitive, you know, and the type of language that, you know, I speak. Like, I had to work a lot on being able to speak in a more tangible manner. I posted on Twitter a few weeks ago. I was like, oh, so if I woke up one day and I was like, hey, so I found out that I'm a different type, what type would you guess that I would be? People were like, oh, ESFJ or ESFP. And one person who said ESFJ, they said that, like, you know, usually NI users, when they speak in a super like abstract and nebulous kind of way or whatever, that like you don't even really understand what they're saying. But like for you, I don't really get much of that. And I took that as a huge compliment, because my whole life growing up, exactly what she explained was what I always got. And to me, that turned people off. Like, It turned off family members, it turned off friends, because they always just felt like they didn't understand what I was saying. I sounded like Jesus speaking in parables. Like people like, yo, what is this guy talking about? And so I had to always like scale it down and adjust. And so now I'm able to actually like still have those original thoughts, but then try my best. And I still work on this, which I guess is why like sometimes it can be like pretty long-winded, but filtering what I'm saying in a way that people be able to understand. And that was one of the ways that I wasn't able to like fit in as easily. So yeah, I feel like that's kind of like my equivalent to, you know, you're like always having like feeling like you had to like produce and all of that. For me, it's like, okay, I just always wanted to like fit in. I just have to fit in. I just have to fit in. Like I'm just trying to fit in. Oh, didn't work here. Oh, great, didn't really work here. And then I just kind of like accepted, like, you know what, I can just kind of rest in just being myself and saying whatever I think, whatever I feel. And as I continue to just say that and do that, which I guess is me getting more into my TI, and really figuring out what I think aside from what everybody else thinks and sharing that, it's definitely going to repel people. And that sucks because I hate repelling people, but I've become more adjusted to it and I've become more comfortable with it because I realized, and I often say the same naked body that can turn somebody on is also the same naked body that can turn somebody off. And so it's like, if I really want to attract the right people, then I have to learn to also be repelling other people. My kindness is something that, you know, repels a lot of people. Like, yeah, I see right through that. Okay. Like, see right through what? Like, no, this is really just how I am. I was like, yeah, no, I just don't like those friendly type of people or whatever. Okay, that kind of sucks, but whatever. Everyone has their own preference. But then there's other people's like, oh, I love how warm Denzel is. I love how this. I love how that. I love how sincere, intentional, and kind that you are. And I started to like notice, like, oh wow, like, sure, I'm driving these people away by being this person, but I'm also attracting the people who actually appreciate it. And this is where I don't have to try to fit in anymore. I just kind of rest and be, and then it's gonna come. So that's my way of then becoming like a human being rather than a human doing. So I feel like that could possibly also be a difference between the ENTJ and ENFJ, which I think there's still going to be like some overlap, of course, being EJs. Like we both do a lot, but getting into just being, that's where like a lot of things can really just start coming your direction instead. And where you might be able to have the most power. And that also comes in through our NI, which brings a lot of like Zen to our, you know, overall appearance and things.
I like what you said about what you shared about like the communication piece, because I feel like a lot of NI users never get to feel like some of the insights or observations they had are appreciated by others, or that people really see it. And so that's great that like that person on Twitter mentioned like, hey, I understand what you're saying, because I think that's such a barrier for NI users. It's like there are all these things that I've seen, observing, that I think could be beneficial to the tribe or to society, but they struggle to cultivate the skills to be able to communicate that to the everyday person. And so for that reason, it's just like this perpetual frustration of just like, what's the reason people aren't getting it? What's going on? And so I think that's really great that you've been able to hone your communication skills in a way that people that are not NI users can understand some of the insights and perspective you bring to the table.
I appreciate that, for real. Well, we're about wrapping up, but I did ask Twitter at one point if they had any questions before I hopped on with you, and I wanted to see if they had any questions to like ask either you. I know that there was one that was like half a joke, half not, from an ENFP. She's very obsessed with NTJ. So I asked Twitter, today I'll be recording a video with a good ENTJ friend of mine on how auxiliary NI shows up and the similarities and differences between how we use it. Feel free to drop any questions you'd like for both or either of us to address below. So the first question from the ENFP, who has this very big obsession with NTJs, just so you know, she asked me to ask you, Nii, how is it like being the sexier type? Don't know if you actually want to answer that question, but she did have a follow-up question saying, serious question, ask him how he relates to NE as well as NI, since they are two sides of the same coin.
I appreciate Any because I feel like I have a close friend. He's an INTP, and he's got NE in his Copilot, and I feel like one of the things that's really helpful about Any is they can help me get out of my mental rut sometimes. Like sometimes in ruminating on something, I feel like Any is able to just like look at it from a completely different lens. And they're able to, I feel like Any is almost like the secret ingredient if we were to using the cooking metaphor. You know how like sometimes you might go to a restaurant and the meal comes out and then like the chef like takes a really interesting twist on an ingredient. And it's just like, I'm trying to think of a concrete example. But I feel like they're able to create new combinations and in a way that's really fresh. And so sometimes I feel like if I'm thinking about something and I'm just stuck and in how I'm seeing it, it's almost like fresh water. It's almost like going from swamp water where it's just like, I'm just thinking about it and kind of ruminating over things and following my original thought process. And then Any is just like this fresh water that comes in and just brings a little bit life or they bring a little bit of color. And it can be really enriching, and it can also be fun too, just to be able to have their energy. I feel like Any is excellent at brainstorming. And so I like to talk to Any when I'm doing generative or like I'm exploring an idea, because they're gonna see things from a vantage point that's just so different. And then I feel like my NI can then take some of those key points and start weaving it together or honing it. And so that's how that's one of the ways that I enjoy like interacting with Any.
Yeah, no, that actually makes a lot of sense, especially being that according to BB's model, NE is our sixth function. And I believe that Dario Nardi was talking about how for ENJs, like we should start like trying to also adjust and get used to using NE a lot of times, because that's where a lot of the creativity for how we're going to, pursue our NI vision can really like come in. Like we might have to like look in a different way, like outside of the box. And I is often thinking about the box itself. And then NE is like thinking outside of the box. So like once you like looking at all of this, like, I like how you use the analogy of like fresh water. Once you see it in that way, then it's like, oh shoot. And then it just kind of like clears the path for NI to like get back on track. So sometimes you really do just need just a little bit of that NE to just kind of like make your NI tap back into the space that it needs to get into. So I definitely feel that appreciation for those types of conversations, or whenever I do get into that headspace as well. Do you find yourself like, how would you say your relationship with NFPs are? Just out of curiosity.
NFP, I get along really well with NFPs.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I feel like NFPs provide such a different perspective, and I feel like they're more spontaneous too. Because being an NTJ, I follow I've got a pretty strong routine that I follow like week by week, which is helpful because it allows me to not have to think or make decisions about a lot of different things. And I think that's good. And there's also a lot of value in being spontaneous and us getting thrown outside of like our comfort zones. And so I appreciate the spontaneity that NFPs bring, and whether they're ENFP or INFPs. And then I also appreciate the NF perspective. I feel like that always creates a really great conversations, because we might arrive at similar destinations, but our point of view and lens are so fundamentally different. And so it's helpful to be able to see to see their perspective and vantage point.
Yeah, for sure. I really even just love how you like what you brought up earlier about NTJs who just seem to like have this disregard for people, and your thoughts behind maybe why that might be, and even your experience with that. Because a lot of times, like I know that for me, I just sometimes like I used to just think like, oh well, that's just kind of how they're wired, and that's just how it's just going to be. But at the end of the day, you come to realize like, oh, this isn't really the case. Like this isn't how it's supposed to be. Like there's some other stuff like working here, and like this shouldn't be like an excuse to be a jerk, or just because like your functions are in this way, like gives you like a license to like treat people in a certain way or like view people in a certain way. There's some deeper work that you might have to like do. So it's cool to like see from an ENTJ himself how like you do actually care for people, and you care for like serving people, even as someone who doesn't have FE in their stack. And I would like to say even like, I care a lot about being like authentic in my intentions, even though I don't have FI in my stacking. And so that's also something that I could see, both ENJs bringing to the table in their own flavoring. And I just really appreciate that.
Well said. I just probably want to express my gratitude again for you taking time to chat. This was great. I think this is going to hopefully help people get a different perspective and understand the ENJ perspective, and that like personality systems are really great tools for understanding people and getting a lay of the land. And it's also not the full picture or story of who we are as well. So I appreciate that you kind of touched on that as we went through this conversation.
Yeah, for sure, man. No problem. Thanks for even taking the time to come on here and answer these questions and all of that. I really do appreciate it. I also agree that this is going to be very good like I'm going to have it on the podcast, and I'm going to have it on YouTube, and it's going to help out a lot of people to see where NI does come in for our type, and just how a lot of times like we can be it'll debunk a lot of the stereotypes that each of us may receive from the type community. So thanks a lot for that, and thank y'all for watching. Done.